Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. The Cerulean Arts tour and talk for the exhibition, Walking Through My Thoughts, guest curated by Bill Scott. The exhibition features the work of Beverly Benson, Stanley Bielen, Mark Bockrath, Deborah Deichler, Abigail Dudley, Paul Dusold, Timothy Giershick, Myke Karlowski, Howard Neifeld, E.J. O'Hara, James Rapone, and Chris Schmidt. So some of the artists are in attendance tonight, and Bill is here to lead the conversation. The exhibition, by the way, is up through November 20th. So hopefully you can come down and see it. Everything is also available on our website, so you can also see things there. I will spotlight Tina's video and turn it over to Bill.
Okay. Well, Tina, thanks so much. And Myke, thank you. And thank you everyone for coming to this. I hope it's an enjoyable evening. I'm really grateful to everybody who said yes to participate in the show. And so Tina is starting at the entrance to the show, and the landscape on the left is Mark Bockrath, who's here, pastel. Personally, I take lots of walks, and my favorite place during the pandemic has been the Woodland Cemetery in West Philadelphia, where Thomas Eakins and a bunch of other artists are buried. And whenever I see the trees there, I think of Corot, but I found myself also thinking of Mark's work. And I wonder, Mark, if you would be willing to talk about your work just for a couple of minutes.
Sure. I do a fair amount of work on small panels in oil, but I think my favorite medium, or more successful medium, is probably pastel on a toned paper. And I do like the idea of going out in plein air as much as I can. Sometimes I'll work from photographs that I've taken, but I find that when I'm working, I'm mostly just looking for relationships of tone and occasional bright color, but I construct the paintings by sort of masses of contrasting tones. And I guess it goes back to my interest in Innes and in a lot of American Impressionist painters. So I'm always thinking compositionally, and I don't paint something unless I've probably seen it several times and I have a very strong emotional response to the composition, and then I'm ready to go.
And Mark is also a painting conservator, and I find I've learned over the last few years that painting conservators are the just absolutely best people to talk to for me as a painter. So
well, you do learn a lot of technical stuff looking at paintings up close, but an odd thing is I find that sometimes I have so many square inches of other painters in my head that it gets kind of stops me from doing my own creativity in a way. You get so many ideas in your head of maybe this would look good here, this would look good, this is how Homer would do it, this is how Chase would do it, and then you just think you got to stop thinking like that and look at what's in front of you and do it.
Yeah, you've got to let those people leave. Okay, Mark has another one at the end of the wall, but the next two pastels are by Beverly Benson, Beth Benson. And I had met her years ago when she was a student at PCA, although she had to remind me of this. I'm embarrassed to say, because I couldn't remember exactly when we'd met. But she was a student of Jane Piper's, who was a teacher of mine as well. And a few years ago, I went to Friends Meeting House in Haverford for a school event, and I ran into her there, and she invited me in. She said she had a show in the meeting house, and I went in really not knowing what to expect, because although I'd known her for years, I didn't really know her work. I'm sorry to admit that, Bev. And when I saw her work, I was just blown away. And I thought, how have I known her for 40 years and not known she's such a wonderful painter? I mean, there were landscape oil paintings that were just gorgeous. And she gave me more choices than anyone when organizing the show for available pictures. So I'm hoping she's going to have another solo show somewhere that's really big. But Bev, I'm talking too much. Would you like to talk about your work?
Well, first of all, Bill, it's just so nice to be back with you. I have memories of you coming into the slide library, and I believe you were doing some scholarly writing on, I don't know, some.
So.
Oh, maybe I like.
You and John photographed a bunch of things from books for me and made slides out of them that I still have.
Okay.
I don't know what to do with anymore.
Yeah, so that just brings back really warm memories. So I enjoy walking through nature and looking at trees, and I kind of almost look at trees as though I'm looking at characters on a stage. You know, you look out there and sometimes I think, oh, you know, I couldn't even put that in a painting because they're all leaning to the left and there's no way to make that work in a composition. And so somehow I bring that awkwardness home with me. I do some work plein air, but I am finding that physically my back is not holding out so long. So I've been able to take things with me. I bought a very good camera because I find an iPhone, I can't look through it, and cameras have been teaching me a lot about composition and light and you know, times of day. I go back to the same place over and over and photograph it so that when I'm working on a piece, I have quite a few different references. And I've also been really challenging myself to think, is this a 2 to 3 composition? You know, is this a 4 to 5 composition? I do a lot of preliminary work, and I'm finding people really like to buy my little pastels that people can't afford my bigger pieces. So I'm feeling like, well, no matter what I do, it's a good thing. So I do a lot of preliminary work. Some pieces never quite are made into a big piece. When I do still life, I kind of consider my still life as though I am walking in a landscape when I do a still life. So the name of this show really rung it, you know, it hit a chord for me. I thought it was a beautiful thought, and I really enjoyed seeing all of the other work, and I feel just so privileged to be showing with all of the people here. I have to say, I've always been a huge fan of Stanley Bielen, and I thought one day I'm going to meet this man. And I was so tickled. Greg and I, my husband and I, were leaving the gallery looking for a place to eat, and I heard this little voice say, "Come in and have a drink." And it was Stanley Bielen and his wife. So I have to thank you, Bill and Michael, and you know, for just making that a possibility. So, but anyway, thank you for a wonderful show, Bill.
Thanks to all of you and to Myke and Tina. I didn't realize actually until seeing this, I don't know why, that there are so many pastels, but the next one to the right of Bev's work, and then the 2 smaller ones on the other side of Paul's are the 3 by Deborah Deichler. Debbie went to the academy when I was there in the 1970s, and she was married to the painter Bill Janata, who they later separated, and he died in 2009. But I had been friends with Debbie, and she left Philadelphia a long time ago, and we used to write each other letters. We always wrote, even when she lived here, we would write letters. And her letters were full of details, the way her paintings are. The writing would go all the way around the perimeter of the paper after she'd filled in the major part of the paper. And then I lost touch with her completely. And I shouldn't say this probably, but I was afraid she was dead because I just couldn't find her, and everything I sent her was returned. And luckily, Carolyn Goodman, who was here earlier, but I think she's left, found her. And so I called her, and part of my reason for reaching out with her was because I'd been in touch with Paul Dusold, who's also in the show, and with Stanley Bielen, because I had been in touch with them when Patrick Connors died, who was a close friend of all of ours. And when he died, originally the show was going to be an abstract show, but when Patrick died, I just wanted to include other things. And also I wanted to include Mark's trees, because I was so moved by, I don't know, trees just seem like the most poignant metaphor for life and passage and how quickly everything goes by. So, and a lot of other more wonderful things. But so I was really glad to be in touch with Debbie. She's not here because she doesn't have a computer, but, and I think this is about the first time in about 15 years that she's even shown her work. So I'm really grateful to include her. And Paul, you know Debbie too. So your paintings are on either side of these two pastels. So if you want to say anything about her too while you're talking about your own work, that would be great. And Paul, who is in the show and who organized pretty much Patrick's memorial service last summer. I've known Paul for years, and since he was a student here, and he currently has I think a retrospective up at the Wayne Art Center, which if any of you are out there, go see. And Paul, I said in the video that John Thornton made, I'm really grateful to Paul because for many reasons. I mean, his sense of humor and his kindness, but also because at the start of the pandemic, I really shut down, and he teaches a class where he copies on Zoom. He copies paintings by other artists, and he copied one of mine. He called me and asked if it would be all right, and I watched or participated, which was the most social activity I'd had in months at the start of the pandemic. And while he was copying my picture, I was so tempted to jump in and say, no, that's not how I do it. You should. And then I thought, no, sit on your hands, Bill. You're learning something. It's his painting, and you'll see how he does it instead of telling him how I would do it. So with that, Paul, do you want to interrupt and tell us how you do it?
Well, I want to say that it's interesting that you mentioned that class, Bill. I remember that well, and the class was also this morning, that same class, and I was talking to the students, and they said, oh yes, that was one of the best sessions of that class when Bill was the guest and we were copying his painting. And interestingly enough, that class was right about the time when I think I was painting the pictures in this show, or at least paintings like that. So that it was during COVID and we were all sort of locked in. And frankly, I didn't mind it because I was able to connect with students and with others like you through Zoom. And it was when I first started making the most of Instagram. So still lives like the one in this show, I was doing from flowers, all of which were basically either in my wife's garden or in the neighbor's gardens, and doing 3 or 4 of them a week, and really enjoying this process of gathering the flowers, setting up the arrangement, painting the picture, and then right away, putting it on Instagram and feeling like I was very much connected to the outer art community of Philadelphia and beyond, and getting all the likes. And that was really my first connection through Instagram and Zoom. both the class that you participated in and the sharing of these paintings. So those really actually went together quite a lot at that time, and made that period of the pandemic, or COVID's first and second years, really a time that I was enjoying my work, enjoying connecting with others over the subject of painting quite long.
Mhm. And were you in school when Debbie Deichler was there?
I was not. I do remember that actually, Bill, you were one of the very first people I met, when I started school at PATH. I remember sitting in Rittenhouse Park talking to you when I was probably 18 or 19, and you had just graduated. And I remember you were very kind. I think you had written some articles for American Artist Magazine and so forth. And you were very kind to me at that time, and I appreciated that. I didn't know Debbie at that time. I did know Bill Giannotta, her husband, her first husband, a little bit. And I can't remember how I met Debbie. I think it was through Patrick Connors and Stanley Bielen. And no, I remember what it was. Here was the thing. I was at a portrait exhibit, and Debbie had a portrait in the show. And I said to my wife, Sharon, I said, "Oh, that's a Debbie Deichler, and that's her standing over there. And she's really good." And my wife said, "Why don't you just say hello to her?" I said, No, I can't. And then finally she said, "Oh, that's ridiculous. Just go say hello to her." So I went over and I said, "Excuse me, I just have to tell you, my name is Paul Dusold, and I really love your work." And she said, "Oh, you're Paul Dusold. I like your work too." She couldn't have been nicer and more lovely. And I think we became friends thereafter. And then, of course, we realized that we had a lot of mutual friends.
Yeah. I'm really grateful to Carolyn Goodman for reconnecting us all to Debbie. And did you go to school with Stanley Bielen, whose paintings are to the left or to the right?
No, I didn't. He and Pat, and I don't know when Debbie went to the PAFA, but they graduated in, I think, 1980, and I started at PAFA in 1981. So I got to know them later through the mutual connection of Arthur DaCosta, and then and that wasn't really until several years after I'd started PAFA, maybe even finished at PAFA, when Arthur retired. We would all kind of meet at his house and sort of bonded over that.
Yeah, I always love Stanley's paintings, and I know a lot of people, artists and people who aren't artists, who love his paintings. And I never really knew Stanley. I was kind of afraid of him the way you might have been afraid of Debbie Deichler before you talked to her. And he's the nicest guy in the world, and he gave such a moving tribute to Patrick at the service. I just wanted to include the three of you in this as a way of kind of having Patrick there too. And Patrick's work was shown in the last exhibition at Cerulean, of artists who had shown with the gallery but are now deceased. So, and I think everybody I know always thinks of Morandi when they look at Stanley's work, although they're very different, but it just kind of makes those little objects monumental. And then I feel guilty about Mark's. This one is gorgeous too. A friend of Myke's and I, who's doing watercolors of trees, Keith Leitner, who's had the shows coming up, talked to me the other day about how much he loves these trees. And it kind of made me feel guilty. This is Mark's second piece at the end of the first wall, because when I first talked to Mark Bockrath about doing the show, being in the show, he was really excited about figure paintings he was doing. And I realized I just let that go. And when I saw the trees, I just fell into the trees. So I'm sorry, we'll do a figure painting show sometime.
No, I'm more known for landscape and probably a little more comfortable in making a finished landscape. than
Yeah,
a
you always
figure
do
painting.
the things that you're afraid to do. So that's what Lewis Carroll said. So that's
Well,
another.
that's in Maine, and that was the end of the driveway of a rental house we had, and it's just it presented itself because I like the shapes of the pine trees and all the angles and the branches. I like the energy of all the branches kind of coming out of the central trunk in all these different directions, like vectors or. In that part of Maine, everywhere you look, there's a composition.
Yeah. And then to your right, I think these are by Abigail Dudley, who I think is probably the youngest person in the exhibition. The other two younger artists are Myke Karlowski and E.J. O'Hara. I think E.J. is here. I don't know if Myke is here. And I met Abby. I had heard of Abby from a lot of painters, but I didn't see her work until about 4 years ago or 3 years ago at the Mount Gretna School of Art when I was a 1 or 2 day visiting critic. And she hung up her paintings, and I just thought, wow, like if she can do this now, I don't know. She just, when I was young, or when I was older than she was, I knew a much older artist who once, one of the nicest things anyone ever said to me was, an older painter said that she was sorry she was so much older than I was because she liked my paintings, and she knew because she was so much older that she wouldn't get to see all of them. And she and Abby's work and EJ's work and Mike's work makes me feel that way, that I hope I live a really long time so I can see as much of their work as I can. And I hope I hope nobody here ever quits, but I hope they never quit.
Bill, can I say one quick thing about Abby?
Yeah.
So I met her first, this is before she even went to PAFA. She was a student at Fleischer, and she was a student of Giovanni Casade's. And Giovanni said, oh, you have to meet this student. I want you to meet this student. I said, oh, okay. So we went out in the hallway, and he introduced me to her. And, Abby is, to say she's bashful is an understatement. And at that point, again, this was 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. Then she started taking my class, and this is at Fleischer. And then she started applying to schools. She was going to community college and studying biology. And then she wanted to study painting too. And she was applying to art schools, and she would tell me about all these art schools, and colleges and universities that she was applying to. And I said, well, Abby, which one do you like best? And she said, well, I don't know. I'm not sure which one I like. And I said, well, you got to make up your mind, because they're all going to take you. They're all going to say yes. And shortly after that, she told me that she had gotten this full scholarship to PAFA.
Great.
So it was a great story.
Yeah, I had invited her a few years ago to be in a show here at Cerulean of figure paintings, and she declined, and I was crushed because rejection's miserable, but I was really sad that she wasn't going to be in it. And so this time I was really thrilled when she said yes. And her painting is at the top too here. That's called Corridor, which I think is a beaut. And then below it is one of Myke Karlowski's 2 paintings in the show. And below that is the 4th painting of E.J. O'Hara's that's in the show. And this is where EJ is here, I think. EJ, are you still here? Oh, please.
Yes,
Would
I
you
am.
would you talk about your work a little bit? We could look at this one, and maybe Tina, it would be okay to go over to EJ's other 3 pictures, and we can come back. If this is Tim Giershick's work, and then here are EJ's 3 other paintings.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for including me in the show. It's an honor, and I really feel kind of at home with everybody in the show, because I feel like I'm somebody that likes to paint things that grow, like we were talking about earlier. I don't know really why. I just feel like I make the best things when I'm thinking about growing. And I don't know, I feel like I have like a precarious relationship to abstraction, where I want to make abstract pictures, but out of things that aren't necessarily invented or improvised. And I don't know if I did that or not with these, but that's what I'm kind of always trying to do.
I met EJ when he was a student, and he really inspired, like Paul during the pandemic, EJ really inspired me to keep making pictures when I was teaching, because sometimes I just came home and shut down after being at school and couldn't do a thing. And he was making these a lot of lithographs, which I didn't quite understand. I mean, look, the medium, not his work. I loved his work, but he was making lots of lithographs from bow ties, like untied bow ties. So I made a print. Oh, Tina put it out. I have, this is my etching from back then, called A Landscape of Bow Ties for E.J. O'Hara. And I traced his bow ties because I thought he could get a richer black. Of course, he couldn't have. He did great, but I thought he could get a richer black with a dry point. And so I tried to show him how. And then he stood on the plate, and I traced his toes in his hand, which I don't know, sounds kooky, but it was really inspiring. I mean, everybody in this show makes me want to paint. And actually, I've rarely met an artist who doesn't make me want to paint. So, so I'm grateful to all of you. That feels to me like water, but I don't know what it is to you, if it is anything.
I don't know. I mean, there's a few things going on in this one. I tend to like to start paintings with something and then keep adding things on top that kind of have nothing to do with the first thing that I put down. Mm-hmm. But the watery thing, I think, is actually a tattoo that I saw on a YouTube video that I think was a Picasso bull.
Oh, okay.
But in a color that wouldn't have been used in a painting of a Picasso bull, but I don't know, might only be familiar with etchings and lithos that he's made of bulls. Yeah. But I think that's what the watery stuff is.
Yeah. I love that it has a foreground and distance.
Yeah.
Really optic of the space and the distance being just shapes but not focused. But I know where it is in space, but not what it is.
Yeah, when I want to do that, I cheat and I use an airbrush because it can get a softer line that looks far away that I can't do with my hands.
There is no cheating in making art.
Yeah, but it's nice to feel like you're doing something a little naughty sometimes.
Yeah. And you met Tim Giershick, who's hanging on either side of you at the opening, right?
I did, yes. I loved him and I love his work.
Yeah, if you go to the Barnes Foundation, you've probably seen him if you don't know him. I don't think he's here tonight. He said he couldn't come, but he works as a preparator at the Barns, and I said this in John Thornton's film too, but because I haven't really talked to him that much ever, but I see him almost every time I go to the Barns, and having seen him. Okay. We all stand for a minute, I guess. You have the radio on. Does anyone know? They're not paying attention, are they? Okay, thank you, whoever that was. Phew. So I saw that. Has anyone seen the Matisse show at the Philadelphia Museum? No? Yes? Well, I've seen it 3 times, and it made me, it's all work he did in the 30s when he made the mural at the Barns. And it really made me wonder how Tim working at the Barns, if that mural influenced him at all or comes into his thoughts ever when he's painting, because of the way he uses the flat color and juxtaposes color and shape. It's almost like I could imagine it almost as cutouts. And I'm seeing it too much through Matisse, and I'm sure he doesn't see it through Matisse at all, but that's just where my mind goes when I see his work. And I love both the flatness of his work and the space of his work. I'm talking only as a painter, not as a critic or somebody who organizes shows. I think they're beauties. And he's been posting a lot of etchings on his Instagram account, which I also love. And originally I was going to ask him just to show etchings, but I'm really glad he came through with the paintings. And I wish he were here, because it's more interesting to hear what people say about their own work than me. And then I don't think Chris Schmidt's here either, who did the 3 on the right. And I've known Chris for years and years, and we both worked at different galleries in the early 80s. And we met once, and he came into the gallery where I was working, and we had this beautiful watercolor show of razor sharp images. And Chris looked at it, and I thought he would hate it because the gallery where he worked showed much different types of things. And he said, wow, these are beautiful. But the owner of the gallery where I work wouldn't understand them at all, because, or his clients wouldn't understand them, because they would just see them as flowers and not as shape and sharp edges and spaces. And Chris and I used to go out drinking once a week with a few other people who worked in galleries, and we teased about starting a union of gallery workers. And we did about 4 or 5 paintings together. And then I didn't really know that he had continued painting until, well, probably about 8 years ago. And then I visited him over the pandemic, and he showed me the paintings he was working on, and I was really, really moved. And he posts them a lot on Instagram, and they just keep unfolding for me. It might be different for the rest of you, but for me, they just seem like entire worlds. And the title for the show came from one of his paintings, which was called Walking Through My Thoughts. And I can never think of titles until the last minute. I title my own paintings the night before the gallery insists on having the titles. But when I read his title, I thought, okay, I'm not going any further. And Tina, I asked her and Myke if that was an okay title, and they were, well, they're nice about everything, so they were very supportive. And he also, I say this in John Thornton's video, I apologize for repeating myself, but Chris loves James Ensor, and he's shown me etchings by Ensor. And I liked Ensor's work, but I really didn't think about it much. But Chris really made me think about it. And now when I think about Ensor, the nice thing is I think about Chris's work the same way when I see trees outdoors, I think of Mark's work. And the next two are by Jim Rapone, who I think is here, who I talked about him in the movie too, and I'm going to make him talk even though he's shy, but he's very articulate. But I had met him around 1981, I think, through a mutual friend of ours who was a film student at Temple for Tyler. And I don't even remember if I knew he was an artist. And then I didn't see him for years, but at an opening one night at Cerulean, he was there because our mutual friend Sheila Chines was in the exhibition with paintings. And by the way, Sheila is here, I think, but hiding. And she has 4 paintings coming up in the show that opens the week after this closes on November 20th. So I hope you'll all stop by to see that show 2 by 2 that opens. Michael will tell you when it opens at the end of it, maybe. But Sheila, so we all went out to dinner, and you know, this is the way my world works. I don't know about you guys. And I met Jim and we were talking, and then Sheila started sending me images of his work off of Instagram, and they were just beautiful. I mean, I just thought, I mean, it's like what I was talking about with those razor sharp watercolors that Chris Schmidt had liked. I mean, they just have like soft edges, hard edges, foreground, middle ground, background, space. I don't really know what they are, but I know where everything is in space, which is kind of what I like the most in art and in life. I don't really care if I know what everything is, but I like to know where it is. Jim, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here, Bill. Hi, how are you?
Interrupt me, please. Talk about yourself. There's Jim. Oh.
You know, that's the hardest part, talking about yourself. But I appreciate what you said about the space and these things. You know, none of these pictures are intentional. I work with scraps of paper I've been accumulating for ages. Scraps of paper like this. It's all over my house. And I start on a blank sheet and I just start composing. I'm very much into the structure and the architecture of these things, the space created. You know, I hope that people are drawn in because they're visually interesting to them. It's a little hard to talk about.
You know, they make me, they kind of, they bring memory, or they make me fleetingly think of other collage work or types of landscape or urban landscape sometimes. But there's nothing by someone else that comes up and replaces it in my memory, if that makes sense. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, everything in here is like that. They're all, you're
Funny,
all,
you know, when I started making art, I'm not a trained artist. I never went to art school. I just started making pictures many years ago. I surrounded myself with a lot of talented people. I read a lot. I look at a lot of art. And, you know, I had a lot of support from other artists, even when I was at my most immature and almost embarrassing stages of this. I love the process of discovering what these things will be. I don't see, Bill, you told me say I'm eloquent, but I'm not. I think there's a lot of themes that also are not intentional, but that run through my mind. I love distressed paper. I love suggestive imagery, just little pieces of something that might evoke something in the viewer. I don't like to be obvious about it. But mostly it's about the composition, the color, the line, the space, and whatever that, hopefully a little bit of magic about, our experience. I hope some of that makes sense.
And there's one more piece of Jim's that I think is in the back, but you could see it on the gallery website where they show everything. Oh, Tina's thought of everything. Oh,
well, that one's sort of almost landscape, like a landscape.
Yeah, that's a beauty.
But sometimes they just turn out that way. Sometimes they're very flat. Other times there's this deep space and this architectural space. And that's the fun of it. It's discovering what's in these spaces that I'm creating.
And just to the right of this, I just want to say it before I forget, is a third work by Bev Benson, who was wonderful in that she kept sending new images, and it was kind of overwhelming actually because they were all really wonderful. But I think you need a gallery the size of the Louvre to show all your work, Bev. You have so much. Yes. And then there's this one on the right, also by Stanley, Bielen. Just so you see everything that's there, even if it's not all hanging up. So whenever you go in, always ask if you want to see more. I'm sorry, Jim, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's fine.
And this the square abstraction is Myke Karlowski. Are you here, Myke? I don't think you are, but Myke was a student at PAFA, and when I used to teach there, I really enjoyed always talking to him, and he just worked and worked and worked, and I never really knew what I was going to see when I went in to visit him to see his new work, because he just kept growing all the time. And then I sort of lost touch with him when he graduated, but I was touched when he contacted me a while back to show me photographs of a theater theater project he'd worked on with another artist. And he just kept trying to, I say in the movie that he always tried to do things he didn't know how to do, always raising his bar. But I always say I think the best things people ever do are the things they do before they know how to do them. And then once you know how to do it, it's kind of boring to just repeat that over and over again. And I feel like this about everything in the show, that it's all made, it's the way I paint too. Like, it's just, you go in not knowing what it's going to be, even if you're painting from a landscape or just using paint, it keeps unfolding as you go. And so I'm really glad Myke is in the show. I'm sorry he's not here to talk about his own work though, because he would be much clearer than I am being. And the last two works in the show, last but not least, are Howard Neifeld, who I only know about because Jim Rapone showed me his work and said, hey, you want to see something wonderful? And he showed me an image of the bottom landscape there. And at the time, I was wondering how this show was going to come together with the more representational imagery and the abstract imagery, because everybody always kind of asks why. Or I'm used to being asked all the time about what are your pictures of when they've seen my own work. So I thought Howard's are they're both abstract and representational. So I saw him as a bridge. His imagery is also functioning as a bridge in the show between everything that was there. And Howard, I think you're here still.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, interrupt me, please.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be in this exhibition. You and Myke and Tina, I appreciate it. Yeah, these two paintings are a little different from each other. The one on the bottom, Whirlwind, I call it, I actually started it with a naturalistic scene in mind, and kind of went from there. It's fairly loose brushwork, and I sort of made things up as I went along, almost in an abstract fashion. Whereas the one up top, Shadow Games, was more typical for me, because I did do a lot of abstract paintings, and I approached this more as just an abstract painting. Although there are elements of nature in the painting, I always kind of end up with some kind of sky or some kind of naturalistic forms, or I even think of myself as making up lifelike forms within the painting. So it's kind of hard for me to look at my work as being purely abstract. But anyway, there they are, and here I am.
Well, I'm really grateful to everyone who showed up tonight, and to Myke and Tina for letting me do this show. It's really a pleasure. It makes, I mean, particularly during the pandemic, I'm more aware of how much I work in isolation, because as a painter, I make paintings by myself. I mean, I don't know about, I mean, some of you paint outdoors, but I know I used to have aunts and uncles say, "Oh, I've never seen you paint. Can I come to your studio and watch you paint?" And I said, "No way." So I don't, and because it seems like a really solitary profession for me. But it's nice to be involved with all of you, and particularly with Myke and Tina, because it makes me feel like I'm connected to a slightly bigger world, or more purposeful world. I could keep talking, but then I think you'll all start disappearing. So,
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you,
okay,
Bill.
thank you, Tina.
Bill.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Bill. Thank you,
Bill.
Myke. Thank you,
Thanks,
Tina.
everyone.
Thank
everyone
you.
for
Thank
coming.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Myke and Tina.
Bye-bye.
So long.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Great show.